Hello and welcome to the bonus module, How to Help Your Kids Quit Too. So please keep in mind that you are going to learn relationship tools in this module that are amazing, that will absolutely improve your relationships with not just your kids, but anybody else that you want to apply this work so that they can apply it and quit vaping as well. I truly believe that this thought and emotional work you just learned is the most important thing that we should be teaching all adults, especially your kids. But there's a special way we have to teach it to make sure that they're receptive, and you're going to learn how to position yourself in this module to make them open and receptive to learning this stuff so they can quit and have the amazing transformation that you've just gotten with this course as well. So be excited, and I'll see you in the next slide. I know how frustrating it can be when you love somebody so much and you're watching them do something that's so harmful to themselves. I remember when I first learned the self-coaching model, I was so excited that I could actually control my thoughts and emotions. It was seriously the best news I'd ever gotten. You mean to tell me I can just choose what to believe whenever I want, and that those beliefs are what create my emotions and my experience on this planet? What? I wanted to scream this from the rafters, and that's exactly what I did. For the first 6 months after learning this material and using it to quit vaping, I preached this stuff to everyone around me. But what's weird is that I found that nobody really seemed to care. And even weirder than that is that people seemed to even be annoyed when I was talking about it. All I wanted to do was help the people I loved and cared about so much learn this material so they could stop suffering like I had been just a few months before. Hopefully by now, you've had a similar experience as I did with these tools. You're fired up, you're empowered, and you're ready to tell everyone in your lives how amazing their lives could be when they actually choose what to think, believe, and feel. This module is going to teach you how to position yourself in a way that will make your kids and anyone else you love in your life be open and receptive to learning this work. You're also going to learn how to protect yourself emotionally when it comes to not being able to control other people's thoughts, emotions, and actions. It's my genuine desire for your loved ones to learn this stuff too, so please feel free to give them your course login when you feel it's an appropriate time to do so. Although this module is going to teach you how to show up in an emotionally clean space, how to create a safe space for your kids and anyone else you love to apply and learn this material, and how to protect yourself emotionally when you can't control other people, this module is not going to be a rulebook for the right and wrong ways to parent your kids, nor is it going to give you a step-by-step framework or talking points for approaching your kids or other loved ones about their vaping or other difficult conversations. This module will teach you how to maintain full emotional responsibility so you can create powerfully intimate spaces to talk with your loved ones about their thoughts, feelings, and actions. Let's get started. Now that you've learned the self-coaching model, you can clearly see that every single emotion you are ever going to experience in your life comes from a thought that you're thinking, not from some kind of outside circumstance like other people or the past. Now that we understand this, we can teach one of the most important concepts that I've ever learned called emotional childhood. Emotional childhood is the concept that's allowed me to stop trying to change other people to feel better. And ironically, that same skill set has put me in the best possible place to help other people change. Emotional childhood is simply what happens when adults don't take responsibility for the emotions they're experiencing. Remember that our thoughts are the only thing that can create our emotions. That doesn't mean that we're never going to choose to feel negative emotions again. It simply means that whatever emotion we are feeling in the moment is always being created by the thought that we are thinking, not somebody else's words, actions, or any outside circumstances. Emotional childhood looks like reacting to emotions. Remember, reacting to emotions isn't actually necessary. We can allow an emotion, even if it's an emotion like anger, to be present in our body and observe it and let it be there and let it pass without ever having to react to it. Emotional childhood looks like acting emotions out. Just because we're feeling sad or again upset doesn't mean we have to act them out and play them out like a drama. We can be upset or sad and process it from a completely clean space without having to act out, yell, scream, or blame others. Emotional childhood, again, also looks like blaming others for how we are feeling. Emotional childhood looks like emotional blackmail. This is a really popular one, especially with a lot of parents. They do this unconsciously and not on purpose, but emotional blackmail is simply when we're trying to guilt other people into feeling negative emotions because we're feeling a negative emotion. Okay, an example is, you should feel guilty if you do that because it will make me upset. We're trying to blackmail people with the emotions that we're feeling. Another example of emotional childhood is saying that we are upset because of something outside of us. You make me upset when you do this. Your actions make me feel upset when you do this. The reason why emotional childhood is so important to understand is because when we take responsibility for our own emotions, it not only allows us to feel better, be more empowered in our life, it also shows others, especially people we are trying to teach how to be with their emotions, how they can show up and not blame anything external for their emotions. It's one of the most empowering things you can do for yourself, and it also puts yourself in a really powerful position to teach other people how they can be if they take responsibility for their thoughts and their emotions. All right, so now we're going to look at some emotional childhood examples. So in this situation, let's look at this model. The circumstance is that you just asked your 13-year-old son to take out the trash, and he just said no. And your thought immediately is that he's acting like such a baby. He can be such a baby sometimes for a 13-year-old. What's wrong with him? You're feeling angry. You're all heated. So your actions from anger is that you slam your hands on the counter. You scream at him. You tell him he's acting like such a baby. And then he finally takes the garbage out because you just yelled at him. And now you're complaining to him, to your partner, about what a baby he is. Then you run to the bathroom because you're so worked up and frustrated that you hit your vape to de-stress. Your result is that, hey, maybe you're kind of acting like a baby. One of the favorite things I've heard my clients say to me doing this work is that vaping is like the adult pacifier. We learn how to use a pacifier when we're really, really small, right? We use it to de-stress, to deal with our angst as babies. The pacifier calms us. And when we become adults, because we haven't learned how to deal with our emotions, we're literally using vapes like pacifiers. I just think it's a really good visual to see that we're actually using vapes because we've learned how to never deal with our emotions. It's kind of funny. So when we get frustrated and we get angry, we're going to always act in the way that we're angry at somebody else for acting. That's why it's so important to understand this work. Remember that the result you have always proves evidence for the thought that created it. Let's look at another example. All right, so the second emotional childhood example is with your really hot husband, because I cannot help myself. So imagine you're in a situation where you're so excited. You just told your husband about this course. It completely changed your life. You actually understand why you couldn't quit vaping, and it all makes sense now, and it worked for you, and you quit, and he's just not listening. And you tell him, and he says, I don't need that crap. I'll just quit when I feel like it. And I don't like the Andrew guy. He seems kind of flighty. And also, your husband probably also will tell you that he doesn't have an emotional problem, because a lot of guys, I'm going to stereotype here because I am one, a lot of guys say that they don't have an emotional problem. They just like how vaping feels. But what they don't realize is that they don't like how they felt before they hit their vape emotionally, because no guys want to talk about their emotions. That's changing, but hey, just want to say that he might say that. If you approach guys with your life and you say, hey, that vaping thing might be an emotional issue, they're probably going to respond in this way and say, no, that's not a problem. I don't have that issue, and I'll just quit whenever I feel like it. I'm just not ready. Okay? So here's your thought about that. God, he is such a hardhead sometimes. Okay? You're feeling frustrated. And when you're frustrated at your really hot husband, you roll your eyes at him, you tell him he's a stupid hardhead, you throw your hands up, you storm off, you're squeezing your fists at him, clenching your jaw. You're building all this evidence in your mind for what a hardhead he can be. You're thinking about all the situations where he's been a hardhead in your life. And what you don't do is have any curiosity and zero compassion for his viewpoint. You don't even question him why he's thinking like that. You just get mad because he doesn't believe what you're believing. Okay? So the result is that maybe we're being kind of the hardhead in this situation. Remember that your result will always prove evidence for your thoughts. So if you're blaming someone else for being a hardhead and you're feeling a negative emotion because of it, you're going to end up acting in a way because of that negative emotion that will create the exact same situation that you're mad at him for. Okay? Emotional childhood. Blaming husband's reaction for why we're feeling frustrated and then needing to complain and vape to deal with the frustration. All right, so when I first learned emotional childhood and I learned that phrase, I felt a little bit attacked. Rightfully so. I'm like, no, girl, I'm 25 years old and I'm not an emotional child, okay? But here's what I want to say. This is my disclaimer for you. If you've been acting like an emotional child, and that just means you've been blaming outside things for your emotions, it's not necessarily your fault, okay? We are not taught how to manage our emotions in school, in college, or in society at large. I went to public schools all the way up until 12th grade. I got a 4-year degree in psychology from a university. I also worked full-time at a psychiatric hospital. If emotional education was commonplace, I should have stumbled across it in at least one of those places, right? Well, I didn't. And you know where I learned how to be an emotional adult was life coaching certifications that the clinical worlds and Educatopia often scoff at, okay? So just be mindful that if you haven't learned this before, or you're like kind of triggered by me calling you an emotional child in certain situations, please don't be triggered by it. Literally, I'm practicing this every single day. It is a practice you practice regularly. There are going to be times in your life after learning these concepts where you're going to approach your children or other people in your lives from emotional childhood. Okay? It is okay. Don't beat yourself up. Don't think I'm attacking you. Don't think that I'm not practicing this crap every single day. I am, okay? It's a practice, but just be mindful that this work is going to free you from your negative emotions towards other people. It really is. And it's also going to put you in the best possible place to inspire and affect change in other people's lives that you love. Okay? So I'm not blaming here. This concept is just designed to help you to have a better life and to be more inspirational and help the people that you love. Okay? There's my disclaimer. All right, so now that we've talked about emotional childhood, we've seen some examples, we're going to learn about the alternative that will help you in your life and help you help your loved ones. Okay? Emotional adulthood. Woo woo! So emotional adulthood is simply when adults take full responsibility for the emotions they're experiencing, that those emotions are being caused by their thoughts, not outside circumstances. So why should we be emotional adults? Because it's going to directly benefit you in so many ways and the people that you love. For one, you're going to feel better, a lot better. Most of the time, you're going to feel better when you're taking responsibility for your own emotions. In addition, your family will like you more. I promise you that when you stop emotionally blackmailing your loved ones, and you also show up taking responsibility and not blaming other people for how you're feeling, people like your family and everyone else are just going to like you more. You are more likable when other people don't have to manage your emotions for you or walk on eggshells to protect your emotions, okay? You're going to have a lot more influence. So a lot of people think the thought that, oh, what, am I just supposed to take responsibility for my emotions and let other people act how they are? What, that's not fair. Yeah. And the reason is because you're going to be so much more influential when other people can't disturb you emotionally. And you get the benefit of feeling better so that other people can't disturb you. It's a win-win for you, okay? I'm really going to sell this to you because it's made my life so much better. In addition, you get your power back, okay? Remember that your emotions are the reason that you do anything in your whole life. So not only do you get your emotions back with emotional adulthood, you also get your actions back, okay? Do you know how much power you have in your life when nobody can affect your emotions? You're responsible for your whole model. That is the most powerful thing you can do for your life and for the people you love. Next, you stop taking responsibility for other people's BS, okay? In other words, when you take responsibility for your own emotions, you stop taking responsibility for other people's. That's part of emotional adulthood, is understanding that not only are we in control of our own emotions, but also we're not responsible for other people's. In addition, you like yourself more. When you take responsibility for your own emotions, you build a relationship with yourself that is amazing. And when you build a good relationship with yourself, you stop numbing your emotions with things like nicotine and overeating. There's nothing to numb when you take responsibility, right? In addition, the last thing is that you stop acting from negative emotions. When you take emotional adulthood seriously, that means that we are responsible for our own thoughts, our own emotions. That means that we don't act out negative emotions anymore. Please be mindful that this is the concept, okay? You're still going to act from negative emotions sometimes in your life, but the amount that you do it is going to be greatly reduced. And when you do, you can take responsibility and apologize when need be. Emotional adulthood is the way that I sincerely believe all adults should be living, and it's the way that's going to position you to not need to numb your life with substances. It's also going to allow you to have the greatest impact on other people's lives, I promise you. I know it seems counterintuitive. Oh, I'm going to take responsibility for my emotions and then let everybody else run all over me. No, you take responsibility for your own emotions actually stops people from running all over you. Get it? All right, let's go on and see some examples. All right, you guys have got to love my pictures. Sometimes I just choose completely random ones because I think it's fun. So, emotional adulthood looks like this: taking responsibility for our joys and also our pains. Isn't that such a cool concept? If we take responsibility for when I feel good and when I feel bad, that's emotional adulthood. Not just the good ones, also the bad ones. Emotional adulthood looks like not expecting other people to make us happy. I really want you to sit with that. You guys, if you could just take responsibility for your own happiness and not have expectations for how other people need to show up for you to feel good, you've just won the entire relationship game. Not just romantic relationships, which it will help tremendously, but also with your kids, with your family, with your friends, with your parents. Everybody will like you more and you will like yourself more when you show up making yourself happy and meeting your own emotional needs. Okay? Emotional adulthood looks like not expecting other people to make us feel anything. This is seriously one of the most important tools you can learn in terms of relationships and in terms of being likable and being relatable and being inspirational, is that you don't expect anybody else to show up a certain way to make you feel good. That's emotional adulthood, and that's a really, really powerful place for you to be. Emotional adulthood looks like grateful that we're the only ones that can hurt our own feelings and that we do it with our own thoughts. When you actually understand the model and you actually accept it, because you've got to accept this, right, to actually apply it first, it makes your life so much better. When you really truly believe that nobody else can hurt your emotions, unnecessary suffering just goes away. It's a beautiful place to be, okay? Let's look at some examples put into models. All right, guys, so now we're going to look at an emotional childhood model and an emotional adulthood model back to back, and we're going to do some examples to show you how you can show up in emotional adulthood if you haven't been previously, and the benefits of doing so. All right, but first of all, because I know that we can't talk about this before I talk about this picture, this is me and my twin brother on Halloween 2022, and amazing dynamic duo. Obviously, I killed the Dr. Evil costume, and he killed the Austin Powers costume. So anyways, this was 2 weeks after I had fallen off a scooter in Detroit and had my face bone literally reconstructed. I had to get reconstructive surgery because I smashed my cheek into my skull. And I went for the Dr. Evil costume because he has a scar on his left side. So just an iconic duo costume. And I thought it was a fun picture to put in here. All right, so let's look at these models. So the first thing I want you to notice is that the circumstances on all of these models are going to be the exact same, okay? So I'm going to show you how to show up in emotional adulthood and childhood for both of them, regardless of the circumstance. Because remember, it's never the circumstance that's creating your thought. It's always what you're choosing to think in that model. And I know it doesn't always feel that way, but it is that way once we learn this work. All right. So the circumstance in this model is my twin brother is still vaping. So please be mindful, you guys. I call myself the Quit Vaping Coach. Okay? I've been doing this work for about 2.5 years, and there are still people in my life who are smoking and vaping every single day. So obviously that can be frustrating. Well, thank God for the model. So I used to think that if my brother would just listen to me, he'd be able to quit vaping. And his life isn't good because he's vaping. And if he would just listen to me, I could help him get out of addiction, and he could get out of all the suffering that I experience, and I just want to help him. That thought sounds so nice, but it's so frustrating to think that. And when I showed up frustrated thinking that thought, I preached to my brother all the time. Oh, I made snippy comments. I showed up passive aggressive all the time. And I judged him. Okay? I know y'all are doing this as parents. You know what I mean? You love them so much and you want to help them. So you get frustrated when they're not acting how you think they should be. And then you show up and you feel justified and you feel good to be passive aggressive. And it's like, the reason I want to help my brother is because I love him. And then I show up every single interaction I have with him passive aggressive because he's not living his life how I should think that he is. Okay? The result in this model, I make my brother really not want to be around me. I push him away. So I want you to notice in this emotional childhood example that this is doing two things. It's doing three things, actually. It's making you feel like crap. It's pushing away the person you're trying to help. And the third thing it's doing, I should say, or not doing, is it's not doing anything to help my brother quit vaping at all. It's having really the opposite effect because now he's still vaping. He's just hiding it from me, and he's feeling even more shame because he knows that when I get around him, I'm going to shame him. And because my brother doesn't have these tools, I can emotionally blackmail him, and he will actually feel negative emotion. And guess what? The reason my brother's vaping so much is because he's feeling negative emotion, and he doesn't know that he's feeling negative emotion. So me trying to make him feel more negative emotion is going to make him vape more because I'm emotionally blackmailing him. Okay? So the emotional childhood model is pretty screwed up. It's not helping anyone. It's making the world a crappier place. And the worst part is that we're doing this because we're trying to help them from a backwards place. The reason I'm creating this model is because I think I know what's best for my brother, and he's not listening to me, so the world's wrong, right? I just want you to see that. And that's exactly what you're doing with your kids if you're acting from emotional childhood. Okay? I just want to show you that. So let's look at the emotional adulthood example. In this situation, again, the circumstance is the exact same. My twin brother is still vaping, even though I'm the Quit Vaping Coach. My new thought that I choose consciously, I don't know what's best for him. I want to offer this to you as a parent. This is like a spiritual topic that I've been getting more into with life and coaching that I actually don't know what's best for anybody else. Okay, I do believe that. I'm not a parent yet, so I don't know how hard it's going to be to practice that thought with kids who I actually do think I know what's best for all the time. So I'm not saying that you have to choose this thought if this one's just too far of a reach for you, but I just want to show you it's a possibility. Okay. And when you believe this thought, I don't actually know what's best for them in this moment. Like maybe he's supposed to be vaping. Maybe this is his path. Just like I had my own path. Maybe he has to have his own path. I surrendered. I really just felt this release of all this negative emotion in my life. And when I no longer feel frustrated around my brother because I'm not judging him for his life, I stop trying to control him or make him quit. I show up with genuine, no judgment about who he should be, who I think he should be. And I get to feel good even when he's quit vaping or when he's still vaping and I can't control my twin. And I think the result that I create in this model is I really do what's best for both of us, okay? Because whenever I show up in a loving emotion that's neutral instead of frustration, that's better for me. And I show up in a loving way for my brother. And if he actually does want to quit or he wants to talk about it, he will feel safe doing it now because I'm no longer judging him and being passive aggressive towards his life. When you show up in judgment, I promise you, you create a wall between you and the person that wants to be vulnerable. They can't do it. Vulnerability is very difficult to exist in a place of judgment. Okay? I just want you to see that. So although I know you really, really want to just help your kids stop vaping because you know how much negative shit they're going to have to experience when they're addicted to things, and it's going to lead to something bad. When you think that and you feel negative because of those thoughts, you show up in a way that can't help them. Really. No one's going to be vulnerable when they're 16 or 18 years old when they have someone judging them. Okay? We can't expect like our kids to know this work. I'm sorry, I don't have kids, but we can't expect young people to know this work or other people to learn this work or to know it when we just learned it, right? Just assume that other people aren't going to know this work and meet them at that place from a place of unconditional love for where they're at, and that is how you help them learn this work, okay? So before we move on to some more examples about emotional adulthood, I really want you to do this exercise, but let me give you some notes beforehand and actually take a minute to do this. Please take some paper out and do this exercise. It will help you tremendously. It'll help you feel better. It'll also help you help your kids, okay? So when we show up in emotional childhood, we victimize ourselves and our emotions to outside circumstances, making us feel truly powerless to the way we feel and the way that we act. Remember that the whole reason why anybody does anything is to make themselves feel better. Okay? The reason why I want my brother to quit vaping so bad in the first place is so that I can feel secure that he's not harming himself. I can feel at peace instead of worried about him. And I can feel like a successful life coach knowing that I can help anybody quit vaping, even my own brother. No matter how we disguise our motives, and we can be really good at disguising our motives, the reason why we do anything or want anything is to feel emotionally better for ourselves, even as parents. Really sit with that for a second. Why do you want to help your kids quit vaping anyways? What emotions will you allow yourself to feel or to stop feeling if your kids actually quit vaping? If they get a 4-year degree, if they win whatever prize you want them to win, if they get the house or the car or the girlfriend or the boyfriend. Remember that the only thing that can make us feel anything is our own thoughts. And when we own this and take responsibility for the thoughts we think, the emotions those thoughts create, and the actions those emotions drive, we lead by example and put ourselves into a position to truly help our loved ones with this work. The last thing I want to say before you do this exercise is that when I changed my model from being frustrated at my brother David to being at peace and accepting him exactly how he was, even though he was still vaping, he came to me about 4 or 5 months after I accepted and I dropped it. He came to me and asked me for this course, okay? And I gave it to him. From a place of complete, I had no attachment to it. I said, I'm going to give you this login. You do what you want. It's okay if you don't listen to it, whatever. Here's the login. It's all good. And guess what? He quit vaping. Okay? When he was ready, I created a safe space for him, not judging him. I came at the situation from emotional adulthood, and it put me in a position to actually help him, and he felt safe enough to ask me for help when he felt ready. Okay? So do this exercise, take a few minutes, and we'll look at some examples on the next page afterward. So I really hope you did that exercise because it's going to give you some enlightenment on the true motives behind why you want to help other people in your life is to feel better. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just good to know that. It puts you in a powerful place to really understand and embody this work. All right. So now we're going to look at some examples. Now it's important to do this work and understand some things. If you have a non-adult child, you are actually trying to control them, right? You are making rules for them and teaching them how to be in the world. So you're trying to control them. Now, if you have an adult child who's not living in your house, it's important to understand that we can no longer control that child. So we're going to approach this work a few different ways depending on how old your kids are and if they're living in your house or not. And please keep in mind that this work can go for any relationship you have. It can be your sister, your brother, it can be your mom, your dad, anybody in your life. We're going to use these examples and you can kind of understand and get some enlightenment from emotional adulthood. But just important to understand that if your kid is still a child, or if they're living in your house where you're creating rules for them because they're under your roof, we approach this work a little bit differently than we would with an adult that we're not trying to control, having normal and healthy boundaries, okay? So let's look at the emotional childhood example. Keep in mind again that the circumstance will always be the same, but we have a completely different result because of how we decide to show up as an emotional adult, okay? So circumstance, I find out that my non-adult child is vaping. My thought is that this is hurting him. I feel worried. And when I feel worried for my kid, I tell him he's worrying me and that he needs to stop vaping because it makes me worry. I ruminate for days and months and years and hours and seconds. I absentmindedly snack on Skinny Pop and then the old Halloween candy, when I think about that and I find it. All right. And I end up hurting myself. I just want you to see this. I love my mom so much. I actually talked to my mom when creating this module because I wanted real parent models. And this is my mom's actual model, okay, from when she found out that I was vaping and smoking weed when I was younger. All right? So whenever I think that this is hurting somebody else and I feel negative emotion, I end up hurting myself. This is where numbing comes in. And what I kind of find ironic is that my mom used to smoke cigarettes. And when she was worried about me smoking cigarettes, I used to smoke cigarettes too. When she was worried about me smoking cigarettes and vaping and also smoking weed, she ended up doing the exact same thing. But when we're stuck in emotional childhood, we don't see the irony in that, okay? And what I want to offer to you again is that when I'm worried, I'm not doing anything productive to help the person I'm worried about. It's just hurting me. Worry has no productive action. And even if you take action from worry, it's going to end up pushing the person away and they're just going to hide from you. When we take action from emotional childhood, we actually teach our kids to lie to us because they're not going to feel safe being truthful to us because they don't want to make us feel upset. That's the natural response for a kid to have when their parent is acting like an emotional child, is that the kid will act like an emotional child. We lay the foundation for emotional childhood, and that's what we're teaching. It's really important not to act like this as parents if we want to help our kids, okay? So again, with so much love, I say this to you, and if you've been acting like this, we're not blaming, we're not shaming. I'm just showing you an alternative that will actually help your kids, okay? So emotional adulthood example. I find out that my non-adult child is vaping, same circumstance. My new thought that's very intentional is that I get to control how I feel about this, okay? Do you see in this model, I'm not trying to make you feel really good about it. I'm not trying to make you like that they're vaping. You don't have to love that and be all happy and go lucky about it, right? But we can at least think the thought that I'm responsible for my emotion about this circumstance that I can't currently at this very second control 100%, okay? My feeling is empowered because when you get to control your emotions, I promise you, empowered feels great. It feels so much better than worry. Your action from empowerment is that you tell them that vaping is not allowed. You set a very clear expectation and a rule, and you set a clear and a neutral consequence if he continues to do it. You tell him that you love him and you want what's best for him. You talk to your partner from an emotionally clean space without anger, shame, judgment, or worry. You show up as an emotional adult. The last thing I want to show you is that you might not be able to completely control the situation. Although you set a clear expectation, a clear rule, and you told your kid what the consequence will be, and it will be followed from a neutral place, they still might lie to you. But I promise you, this is going to put you and your whole family in such a better position than if you're worried, hurting yourself, and numbing over your own emotions, and acting out from those worries, okay? So let's look at another example. All right, so in this example, we're going to look at emotional adulthood with an adult child who's living on their own. A really important note for this model is that you can replace your adult child who's living on their own with any other adult in your life. Emotional adults do not control other adults. They control their own thoughts and emotions and actions, okay? It's really important to understand this. So many parents have adult kids who are not living under their roof, who they're still trying to control so they can feel better, okay? So, from this situation, you are not supposed to control your adult kids. And when you actually take ownership over your thoughts and your emotions and your models, you no longer need to control them to feel better. So you show up in a clean space. All right, okay? So circumstance. My adult child who does not live at home is still vaping. My thought. He needs to stop or something bad will happen. Obviously, when I think a thought like that, I'm going to feel fear. In my action, I shove this course in his face. I bring it up every time he's around. I sit in fear. I eat and numb to avoid feeling it. When my mom thinks that I shouldn't be doing something with my life, even though I live on my own and I have my own stuff going on and I'm an adult, she feels negative emotions. She feels worry, anxiety, panic, fear, and she ends up hurting herself. Again, when she's feeling these emotions, she buffers, she numbs over her emotions. And then when I am around her, she tries to control me, which always pushes me away. Even though I'm 29 and I embody this work and I know this work, it's sometimes easier for me just to not be around my mom than to have to coach myself into emotional adulthood when I'm around her and she's judging me. So I just want to offer that to you. Even if your kids learn this work and you're still showing up judging them, they still just might not choose to be around you because nobody wants to be around someone who's judging them. It just doesn't help create any kind of intimacy in the relationship. Okay? The result that she's creating when she's thinking thoughts that lead to fear is that I act in a way that guarantees something bad will happen for myself and my relationship. Again, emotional childhood doesn't actually help anybody else. It doesn't help anybody that you want to help, and it doesn't help yourself. It always has the backwards effect. That's why it's so important to understand this. So let's look at an example from emotional adulthood. My adult child who does not live at home is still vaping. Okay? And again, you can replace this adult child with any other adult in your life. Okay? Adults don't control other adults as long as they're not living in a personal property boundary, right? Make sense? All right, so my thought. Him vaping does not create my emotions. Again, I chose this model really intentionally. I'm not trying to make my mom feel good about me vaping, right? Or me smoking weed or whatever I was doing. I'm trying to just show her that she can control her emotions when she can't control her circumstance. Feeling neutral. When she feels neutral, she lets him know about the amazing course she just took, but she doesn't make him feel pressured to take it. She no longer makes backhanded comments, right, about vaping. She's no longer passive aggressive to me whenever she's around me. And she tries to love me as the current version I am without judgment. That's a skill set, by the way, and you can practice that at any moment with any relationship you have. It's called unconditional love, and I would recommend it strongly for any of your relationships. My result when I choose emotional adulthood is I get to feel better even without controlling him. And again, remember, because I get to feel better, I show up in the best version of myself that is most likely to be influential to help them. All right? All right, now we're going to look at one final example of an adult child who's living in your house. So remember, the goal of emotional adulthood is to take responsibility for our emotions. That doesn't mean that we don't set rules and boundaries if somebody's living under our roof or if somebody's still a child, okay? We're going to talk more about rules, boundaries, and expectations coming up because it's important to understand them and how to use them to show up as an emotional adult. But just be mindful that if somebody's living in your house, whether they're a child or an adult, you are allowed to have rules for your house and you are allowed to enforce them. But you don't need to enforce them from an emotionally childhood place, okay? That means that we can enforce them from a completely emotionally clean place without telling them that we're upset or getting angry or responding to anger. Make sense? So let's look at both models. The circumstance in this model is my adult child who lives with me is still vaping. My thought, he needs to grow up. Feeling, irritation. Action, when I'm irritated towards my kid, I shove this course in his face aggressively. I do it from anger too, and tell him how pathetic he is. I bring up every time he's around how he should take this course and how he's doing life wrong. I roll my eyes. I make sarcastic comments to him. I act passively aggressively when I see him vape. I am the one who acts like a child. I'm the one who needs to grow up in this situation. Whenever I'm blaming someone else for being a child, I promise you, and I'm believing that thought, and I'm feeling negative, I promise you I end up showing up in the exact way that I'm mad at them for showing up. And I want to say this too. I don't want you as a parent to feel attacked because all these are parent models. Like, I have showed up as an emotional childhood to my mom all the time, okay? So please be mindful. I'm not trying to attack parents in this module, and kids are showing up like this all the time as well, probably more often than not. But just be mindful that because you're the one that wants to help your kids, you're going to have to be the one that leads with emotional adulthood, okay? So please don't feel attacked. All right, emotional adulthood. Let's look at the model. So same circumstance. Now the thought I have about this situation is that I do not allow vape in my house, right? That's a reasonable thought. It's a rule I have. I do not allow it. It's a rule. I feel calm because I'm not upset. I'm an emotional adult. I don't need to show up from any anger or any negative emotion. I set a clear boundary, a very clear and clean boundary with no negative emotion, and I let him know that if he continues to vape, he's going to have to move out. I also let him know about this course in case he's interested. Okay? I just want to show you how that could be, by the way, in a real life example. Hey, Andrew, I love you so much, but I have a rule in my house, okay? If you're in my house, I don't allow vaping. That's a personal rule I have. It's not against you. It's for me because that's just a rule I have. I no longer vape. I just don't want it in my house. It has nothing to do with you as a person. I love you so much. And I also want you to know that It doesn't make me angry. I'm not feeling upset about it. I'm completely emotionally neutral. I just love you and I have this rule and I will honor this rule because I respect my boundaries. Okay? Do you see how clear that boundary is? We're not blaming, we're not shaming, we're not angry, we're not emotionally blackmailing anybody. It's a clean boundary made in love, okay? The result I have is that I set a clear boundary about what I am and what I'm not willing to tolerate in my own home. Clear, right? And keep in mind that the focus of this model isn't actually to get your kid to quit vaping, okay? It doesn't need to be. They're vaping, they're an adult, they're allowed to do what they want. And you give them, you tell them from a clean and loving place that you can help them, but you don't expect them to change for you to feel better. All right, now we're going to look at one final example. I thought it was only fair that I put a child to parent model in here so we kind of level the playing field. So this is a real model from my own life, and these are my parents on the right. This is my mom and my dad. My dad's name is Jim with a G. My dad always says there's no J in the Italian alphabet, so my dad's name is Jim with a G, Gim. My brother's name is Jim with a G, Gim. My grandpa's name was Jim with a G, Gim. And everybody says it like that, and it's just kind of a running joke we have, Gim. And this is my mother on the right, and I want to say that both my parents smoked growing up. My mom actually quit about a year and a half ago. I'm very proud of her, and now we're working on taking this work further with the emotional tools she's learned so that she can lose some weight and stop overeating. And I will tell you that if you want to lose weight, there's no better tool to do it than emotional adulthood. Okay, the reason why so many people overeat or vape, remember, is because we feel out of control to our emotions. So just want to offer that this work is going to help you in other areas too. And yeah, that's just how it goes. All right, so circumstance in this model. My dad smokes 2 packs of cigarettes per day after getting 2 emergency leg bypass surgeries. So in 2021, my dad went to the doctor because his legs were numb. And they found out that he has 2 100% blockages in both of his main arteries in his legs. So literally, what the doctor said is, imagine that you have a freeway that's closed, and instead of using the highway, you're using all the side dirt roads. That's what your veins are doing in your legs right now. And he said it was undeniably, certainly, from smoking as much as he did for 40 years. Okay? So my thought in 2021 is that he's an absolute moron because he got a surgery and he told everyone he quit smoking, and then 3 weeks later he started smoking again. Okay? So my emotion in that model was resentment. I judged him heavily. I talked shit about him all the time to my brothers, and I talked shit to his face, but I was too cowardly to actually talk shit, so I would just be backhanded in front of him and be passive aggressive. I tried to shove thought work down his throat and tell him I knew what was best for him. I brought zero compassion or understanding to the table, and I avoided being around him. My result, in my opinion, is that I was acting like kind of a moron, okay? Whenever you act from resentment, you act like an idiot. Let me just say that with certainty. I don't care who you are or what you're thinking or how justified it feels. If you're feeling resentment, you're acting like a moron. Okay? Resentment is the poison that runs through your veins after the snake bites you. No one's ever died from a snake bite. They've died from the emotion, the resentment that they've continued to carry with them over and over in their lives. Okay? I just want to say this. There are no justified resentments. Do what you want with that information, but if you actually listen to me there and listen to that and try to find the reasons, the thoughts that you're feeling resentful, I promise you'll find that it's a thought error that you can clean up and show up in love instead. Okay? The reason we drop resentment and we forgive people is not for other people, it's for ourselves. Remember, we're removing the snake venom out of our own veins when we choose to feel better emotions than resentment. Just want to say that. All right, so the new model. Here we go, emotional adulthood. My dad continues to smoke 2 packs of cigarettes per day after getting not 1, but 2 emergency leg bypass surgeries over the course of 2 years. My new thought, and this is one that I've really been working on, is I can choose to love my dad exactly how he is. I want to tell you guys something. Just because you try to do one model on a thought doesn't mean you're going to believe the new thought. This thought towards my dad, unconditional love, has been one that I've been working on for the last couple of years, okay? Just want to offer that to you. Thought work is something that we practice over time. Your brain will at some point believe a new thought, but remember that our brains are kind of elastic. So we have to practice and practice and practice and find evidence for the thought we want and evidence against the thought we don't want over and over again. But I will say that this thought of unconditional love, becoming more spiritual in my life, has helped me to adopt this thought because I truly don't know what's best for someone else. And to me, that's a spiritual belief, just in my own opinion. I don't know if you're spiritual, religious. You don't have to be to take this course whatsoever. But I just want to offer from my own personal experience that if you're having trouble loving someone unconditionally, I have found some help with that in the spiritual world. Okay? So when I choose to love my dad unconditionally, I don't judge him for where he's at. I show up and I spend genuine quality time with him. I set a clear boundary that I will leave the house or not get in the car if he smokes, okay? That's a clear boundary I set with my dad. He doesn't smoke in the house anymore. And what I want to offer to you is the reason I want my dad to stop smoking cigarettes is so that I can continue to spend quality time with him. I want him at my wedding. I want him with my kids one day. I want him to be in my life and spend quality time. But when I'm judging him and feeling resentment, I guarantee I'm not spending quality time with him in the time that I'm guaranteed to have with him. Okay, does that make sense? You're not guaranteed to have time with all of your loved ones permanently. But when you show up in resentment in the moment you actually do get to be with them, you're guaranteeing you're wasting that quality time with them in the moment. Remember that our result always proves evidence for our thought. I'm scared that he's going to pass away early, so I'm guaranteeing that I don't even get to enjoy the time I have with him. Does that make sense? So the result that I get is I get to show up in love and actually enjoy being with him no matter what he's doing with his life. It's a really powerful place to be. I really want you to consider that for your life and for the people that you love. When we stop trying to judge them and make them be something and be somewhere they're not at, we actually get to be with them and be in love. And remember that when we do that, we put ourselves in the best position to help them. My dad is most likely never going to stop smoking cigarettes. And I have to tell you a funny story. He did quit last year. He quit for a couple of weeks because he had to for the surgery. Like, they literally did a blood test. They were not going to do surgery if he had tobacco in his blood. So he had to quit, right, to get surgery. And he was telling everyone that I helped him quit. And I'm like, Dad, stop telling people I helped you quit because you did not do this work. You didn't take the course. You didn't learn the thought and emotional work. I love you either way, but please stop telling people that because I have a hunch that you might go back. I told him that, totally candid. And he did go back to smoking. So I just think it's kind of a funny story. Like, I was telling people, I was like cleaning up his mess behind him. I'm like, I didn't help him. I didn't help him. I love my dad. I'm happy he quit, but he didn't use my tools. So just kind of funny. But seriously, this practice of learning to love people unconditionally in your life, it's a practice. So, be patient with yourself, but also, practice it regularly and you'll get it down. All right, so we're going to wrap up emotional adulthood by just talking about the notes that we went over and kind of reviewing. And then at the very end, we're going to do boundaries and another tool that I have for you that's really going to help you wrap this stuff up, okay? So emotional adulthood means taking responsibility for all emotions and for how we show up, okay? So even if we're in anger and we're choosing to be angry, we don't have to respond to that anger. One of the jokes I have with my family, because they know I teach this now, so they're always like, oh, Andrew, we're not responsible for creating your emotions whenever I'm frustrated or angry around them because, I'm still human that's going to feel those emotions sometimes. And what I always say to them is, no, you're right. I'm choosing to feel pissed off at you right now. But just because I'm choosing that doesn't mean I'm going to respond to it. I'm just going to be angry. I'm going to let myself be angry. So it's not just taking responsibility for your emotions. It's also taking responsibility for showing up, even if you choose a negative one. Okay. Emotional adulthood is also a practice that you'll get better at over time. This is a practice. Think of your brain as your mental muscle. Okay. Just like you go to the gym more than one time in your lifetime, you'll also have to practice this work more than one time to get better at it. Okay. When you embody emotional adulthood, people in your life will notice. And they eventually, if you're embodying it without judgment, they will eventually come to you when they're ready to learn it. They will, okay? It's very hard to be emotional adulthood often and for other people not to take notice and to want to be in it as well. Who doesn't want to feel good all the time, right? Who doesn't want to be in power and control of their emotions all the time? When you try to push people into this work, you actually step out of emotional adulthood because you're judging them and you end up pushing them away. So be mindful of that. Don't push people into this work. Show up in unconditional love. And that's the best place to help them. If we mess up, we can simply apologize if appropriate and move on. Again, there are times where I don't act like an emotional adult. And if I feel like owning it, I will own up to it, apologize like the emotional adult I am, and correct for it for next time, okay? Emotional adulthood takes actions from empowering emotions. Okay, sorry, I read that wrong. Emotional adults take actions from empowering emotions. Okay, so more often than not, because we're acting like emotional adults, we're going to only act from positive emotion. And if we're in a negative emotion, we can just let it be there. Remember how to allow an emotion? If I'm in frustration, I can actually allow frustration without responding to it, just like an emotion or a craving. And then I can let it pass and then choose a more appropriate emotion to take action from. And then finally, it only takes one person doing this work to dramatically improve a relationship, okay? So I know you're still thinking like, well, why do I have to do this work but my wife doesn't? Or why do I have to do this but my child doesn't? Because if you do this, it's going to make your life better and your relationships better. So don't take that position that other people should have to change for you to feel better or for it to be fair. The fairest thing for you to do is to make yourself feel good right now in the moment. You get to benefit and so do your loved ones, okay? And one really important thing to understand when doing this work is the timeline of brain development, especially in terms of teaching this to your kids. So remember, the whole point of the thought and emotional work that we're practicing in this course is to strengthen the prefrontal cortex, or I call it the human brain, right? To override the default thoughts and emotions of the more primitive and automatic animal brain. As humans, our prefrontal cortex does not fully develop until we're about 25 years old. You can see clear evidence for this if you look at how an 18-year-old acts in relationship to like a 27 or 30-year-old. So just be mindful that if you're teaching this to your kids, understand that they might not have the full hardware to do this work and embody it at the level that you can. So be patient with them and understand them and try to meet them where they're at. And I just want to give you a quick refresher of the prefrontal cortex. So remember that the prefrontal, or the human brain, is responsible for things like abstract thinking, morality, empathy, goal setting, emotional regulation, and thinking about the past and the future. That means that if your kids are under 25-ish, they typically won't have the complete hardware to access this work on a more deep level like a matured adult can. So the best way to teach them this work is to model it and to be patient with them from a compassionate and understanding place that they might not have the full ability to actually think about their own thinking just yet. And if they're over 25, it's our job to remain in emotional adulthood so we can put ourselves in the most empowering place to help them learn this stuff. If your kids are vaping, it's because just like you, they've accidentally picked up some unhelpful false belief systems along the way that led them to addiction, and they just haven't been taught how to feel their emotions yet without relying on outside things and substances. It's our job as emotional adults to remember this and to approach the situation from love and as neutral emotions as possible. When we take complete responsibility for our own feelings, and we remember that the reason we want to help our kids is so that we can feel better for ourselves, we remove emotional attachment to their actions, and we can set clean and loving expectations without fear, worry, or anxiety. On the next slide, we're going to look at how to set healthy boundaries and rules and expectations. All right, so now and over the next couple slides, we're going to talk about the difference between boundaries and rules. I have found in my experience that boundaries are a highly misunderstood thing, and I actually think that a lot of times they're taught incorrectly in containers like therapy. So a boundary is simply a property or emotional expectation we set and honor for adults. Very important word there. With a clear consequence if it's broken, how we're going to respond. Okay? That's different from a rule. A rule is an expectation we set to control how our children will behave with a clear consequence if it's broken, how they need to act. So the fundamental difference from a boundary and a rule is that a rule is designed to control somebody, our kids, right, who are not yet adults. Whereas a boundary is used to say how we're going to respond if somebody acts a certain way. We're not controlling someone with a boundary. We're just saying that if they do what they do as an adult, because they're allowed to do whatever they want, then this is how we will respond, okay? All right, and here's the actual structure of how to create a boundary versus a rule. So the structure of a boundary is if you do this, then I will blank. You can see that it's focused on how we're going to respond if an adult acts a certain way. Whereas a rule is if you do this, then this is the consequence, okay? So let me give you some examples. If you smoke in the car, then I will ask you to pull over and I will get out. That's a boundary. That's a correct set boundary. You're allowed to smoke. You're an adult, and this is your car. But if you do this, this is my response. Okay? Another example for a boundary is if you smoke in my house, then I will ask you to leave, or then I will call the police if you refuse to leave. Okay? So you're still giving the adult the option to do whatever they want, but if they've crossed a boundary, you're telling them how you're going to respond. Okay? The difference is with a rule is now I'm just telling you how to act. If you vape, then your phone will get taken away. If you vape, then you are grounded and not allowed to leave the house this weekend. Do you see the difference? One is focused on letting the adult do what they want and be who they are and how we'll respond. The other one is just plain and simple a rule on how you are allowed to or not allowed to act. Some basic notes here is that boundaries are not created to control others, okay? Very important. A lot of people set ultimatums or rules for other adults. That's not appropriate. Adults are allowed to act however they want, and if we set boundaries, they're allowed to act that way, and here's the response we will have. Never to control their adults, controlling how we'll respond in the situation. Rules are created to control others, and really, they're created to just control your children, okay? It is your job to honor your own boundaries and your rules by following through. One of the biggest issues I see with my clients, whether they're parents or not, is that they're not honoring their boundaries and their rules, and they're wondering why other people aren't following them, and they get upset. It's like you have to be able to honor your own boundaries. It is your responsibility to do that and actually honor them, and if you're not doing that, you're the one disrespecting your own self, not the other way around, okay? You do not need to set a boundary if your kids are not adults, okay? You can simply set a rule because as a parent, you actually are trying to control your kids, okay? You cannot control other adults and you cannot control your adult kids. This is really important to understand. A lot of parents whose kids have moved out and they are adults are still trying to control their kids. That is not appropriate anymore. We do not set rules for adults. And boundaries, when we do set them, are not designed to control. They're designed to control our response. So just be mindful. Like if your adult kid is not living in your house, okay, and you're trying to control them, that's not really appropriate boundary setting. That's just trying to control. And remember, the reason that we're trying to control them is so we can feel better. So you can just cut them out of the whole equation to make yourself feel better without needing to necessarily set any kind of a rule or boundary. Okay? If your adult kids live with you and they pay rent, you're fully allowed to set a boundary for what is allowed and not allowed in the home. But if you set a boundary in that situation, let's say that your kids live with you, let's say they're, just for an example, they're 25 years old and they're living with you in your house, you can set a boundary. You don't set a rule for them. They're adults. So we can set a boundary. If you vape here, then I will ask you to move out. Okay, that's different than you're not allowed to vape here. Do you see how we treat adults a little bit differently than kids? Even if we have a boundary to set, it's still focused on how we'll respond as opposed to making them act a certain way as a rule. So proper boundaries should be set from a loving and neutral place. This is really important to understand, and I see this done a lot of times incorrectly. If you're setting a boundary or a rule, honestly, they should be done from a neutral place. That means that we're not setting them from anger, resentment, frustration. Set it from a clean place. And if you need to be angry or frustrated, go and process that emotion beforehand, allow it, process it, be with it, and then come back and create a boundary or rule from a neutral place. The reason that we set boundaries and rules is out of love because we want to improve the relationship we have with our loved ones so that we don't feel resentment, okay? So just make sure that if you're setting them, it's from a clean place, not from a resentful or an angry place. That's not an appropriate emotion to be setting boundaries or rules from. All right, and then finally, boundaries should be set from a neutral experience and enforced without involving negative emotion. Okay, so whether we're setting or enforcing boundaries or rules, we can be emotional adults with them by being neutral. Okay, we don't need to scream or yell to enforce a boundary. We can just say it from a completely neutral place. Dad, I love you. If you smoke in the house while I'm here, I'm going to leave. I'm not upset if you do this. I'm not going to be angry. It's just a boundary I have, and I'll respect my boundary from a completely neutral and clean space. I don't need to be emotional about this. It's just a rule I have that I'm going to follow with so much love for myself and for you. I feel resentment, and I don't want to feel resentment, okay? So make sure that whether you're setting boundaries or rules, they're being set and enforced from a neutral and a clean place. All right, and here's a bunch of examples for you to look at so you can understand the difference between a rule and a boundary. All right, so some rules. You are not allowed to vape. If you vape, your phone will be taken away. Cool? You will clean your dish and put it in the dishwasher when you are finished eating. If you do not, you will not be allowed to go out this weekend. You will be home by 10 p.m. If you come home later than that, your car access will be removed, or you will not be able to go to whoever's house anymore. Okay? Do you see how those are focused on the kid and they're focused on how they are or not allowed to behave? Okay, now the boundary difference is if you smoke in the car, here's how I'm going to respond. I'll get out and ask you to pull over. If you do this, you're allowed to vape in the house. It's okay. You're allowed to choose to do that because you're an adult, but I'm going to leave if you do it. If you yell at me, I will ask you to leave my house. Okay, and this is, again, you have to enforce this boundary. If you set this boundary with somebody and you don't enforce it, they're not going to respect it, and then you're going to get mad at them, but you're the one not respecting it. Okay, again, neutral, clean place. You don't need to yell. You can just do this from a completely clean place. If you yell at me, I'm going to ask you to leave. You just yelled at me, I'm going to ask you with so much love to step out of my house. And if you don't, I'm calling the authorities, not from an upset place, but you need to leave. I respect you. I love you. I'm not upset, but you need to leave. Okay? Do you know how powerful that is when you start doing that in your life, by the way? When you actually tell people your boundaries, and you're not doing it to control them, you're just doing it to respect your own emotional or physical property, and you actually honor those boundaries from a clean place, it's very powerful. And the relationship you build with yourself, by the way, doing that is amazing. You cannot have a better relationship with yourself rather than setting boundaries and honoring it. All right, and then finally, if you vape in my house, I will ask you to move out, okay? By now, I think it's pretty clear what a rule versus a boundary is, and if you need to set boundaries or rules, I recommend you do it. Set it, figure it out. A clear indicator of if a boundary needs to be set or a rule is if there's a resentment in your life. If you're feeling resentful for something, it's oftentimes because we're not honoring a rule or a boundary that we need to honor, and the resentment's directly being created because we're not honoring our own rules or boundaries, okay? Oftentimes people blame other people for resentment, but we're the ones that create it by not honoring ourselves. Now that you have a very clear understanding of the difference between healthy boundaries and rules, I want you to take a minute to actually figure out what you want those to be in relationships to your kids who may be vaping, okay? So take a moment to consider the rules and boundaries you'd like to create in reference to your kids who may be vaping. Remember, if your kids are adults, you're not creating rules for them to have to follow. You're creating boundaries for them to either choose to honor or not, and how you'll respond if they don't, okay? If a rule or boundary needs to be set, figure out a very clear consequence that you're willing and able to follow through if it is broken. Tell your kids about the rule or boundary, and if needed, honor the consequence from an emotionally neutral place. It is this clear, it is this simple. In like half of your issues with your relationships in your life will fade away if you actually set and honor your boundaries every single time. The main issue I see over and over again with people who make boundaries is that they're not willing to actually honor them because it's uncomfortable, and then they get mad at the person that has broken the boundary, even though it's us who's creating the issue by not honoring our own boundaries, okay? So set very clear boundaries, set very clear consequences, honor them from an emotionally clean place, and I promise you, your relationships will get so much better, and people more often than not will start honoring those boundaries and those rules. Now that we've talked about emotional adulthood, and you've learned how to set boundaries and rules for your kids from a clean and neutral place, we're going to talk about the manual. The manual is simply a rule book that we create for somebody else in our lives about how they should act so that we can feel good. As a parent, it's entirely expected, normal, and okay to have expectations for how your kids should behave. Just remember that when we operate from emotional adulthood, it means we don't need to be emotionally affected if those expectations are not met. And your consequences can be followed through from an emotionally clean and neutral place. However, the problem with your kids in manuals comes when your kids become adults and you're still trying to control them so you can feel better. Please keep in mind that we typically have a manual for everybody in our lives. We have a manual for how our mom should act. We think our dad should act a certain way. We have manuals for how our spouse, our kids, our coworkers, our coaches, our teachers, etc. For everyone, we typically have manuals. Remember, it's a rule book for how we think other people should act, and when they don't act that way, we get upset. Manuals sound like this: he should not vape. He should come over every Sunday night for dinner. She should spend more time with me. She shouldn't be dating him. She should call me on my birthday. He should know what I like. He should invite me to Thanksgiving dinner. In addition to making you feel bad a lot of the time, manuals come with a lot of problems. For one, adults are allowed to behave however they'd like. We can't control other adults no matter how much we'd like to or we try. So if we have manuals for them and we get upset when they don't act how we think they should, then we're literally giving them control over our emotions and therefore our actions and our results. Very disempowering. Another problem with manuals is that we are responsible for meeting our own needs, not other people's. Okay? So a lot of the times we have manuals in our lives for how somebody should act, like our spouse, because we want them to make us feel good. It's a very disempowered place to be, and it leads directly to resentment. Another problem with manuals is that nothing outside of you can create your emotions. So when we're expecting somebody to act a certain way to feel good, we're operating from emotional childhood. Another issue with manuals is that they lead directly to people-pleasing, manipulation, and resentment. When we have a manual for somebody else and we get upset when they don't follow it, we actually teach our kids to people please, which is just lying so that they can manipulate our emotions. Really, really bad thing to teach your kids, especially if you want them to learn and embody this work when it comes to addiction. And the last problem with manuals is that when you have a manual for others, you give all of your emotional power away to somebody else. Okay, you literally victimize yourself for how somebody needs to act for you to feel good. One of the biggest issues I see with manuals come up is that people have them for their spouses, and it creates so much resentment and people pleasing, and it also makes you feel crappy in your relationship most of the time. So it's just really good to be aware of a manual when you have one, and be mindful of how you're giving your emotional control over to somebody else when you totally don't have to do that. All right, so I want you to stop and actually do this exercise. It's very, very empowering. I'd recommend that you do it for your kids. If you don't have kids or if you're not feeling it for them, then I would recommend doing it for a partner or somebody who you find kind of difficult to be around, okay? So choose one person in your life or your child and write down a list of everything you'd like them to do, but be really specific, okay? Like I would like them to show up every Sunday night for dinner, and I would like them to bring a dish. I would like them to put their dishes in the sink after they're done eating. I'd like them to no longer vape. They should not talk to that one friend anymore. They should clean up their bed once they get out of it in the morning and make the bed. They should do etc., right? I want you to make the entire list. Don't hold back. Write down everything you'd like them to do if you could get them to do all that things, okay? Next, for each item, you want to write down how you would feel if they did it, okay? What emotion would you allow yourself to feel if they actually showed up and did all the things on your manual? But write down each emotion for each specific point that you've written. All right, next you're going to write down how your thoughts about them would change if they did all those things that you asked. And then finally, think about the last time somebody had a manual for you. Okay, or somebody expected you to do something and when you didn't do it or show up how they thought you should, they felt upset. How did it feel when they were trying to control your actions so they could feel better? Did it bring you closer to them or make you want to be around them? So take a minute, do this exercise. It's really important because actually doing this exercise, you're going to see that you actually do indeed have a manual for somebody in your life. And if you do this exercise for multiple people, you're going to see that you have a manual for other people in your life. Everyone. As many people as you do, as much enlightenment you'll bring onto this situation so that you can learn how to correct for it in the next slide. Okay? So now that you've taken full responsibility for your own emotions as an emotional adult, you've set clear boundaries and rules from a neutral place, and you've written down your manual for somebody in your life so that you can see that you actually do have a manual for how other people need to show up for you to be happy, we're going to talk about the solution to it. What if you just decided to let go of your manual or your expectations for how other people should or should not act so that you could be happy? I really want you to take a minute, pause this, and imagine that. What if son or daughter or spouse or mom or dad got to show up exactly as they've always showed up, but you no longer get emotionally affected by it? Of course, you can still expect things from other people, and you can even voice those expectations out loud, but the difference is that you let go of any emotional attachment you have to those expectations. This would not only free you from your own negative emotions, but it also makes you so much more likable and approachable in relationships. Imagine how much people in your life would want to talk to you if they knew that you had no emotional agenda for how they had to show up. Remember that the reason you want someone to act in a certain way is always because you want to feel better yourself. When you take control back over the thoughts you choose to think, you get to feel better right now, even if your spouse or your adult child is still vaping, your partner hasn't done the dishes, or your mom still tries to guilt you for how many times you have or haven't called her this week. All right, so let's review everything you've learned in this module really fast, okay? If you want to put yourself in the best possible situation to help your kids quit vaping or to help anybody else in your life with anything, the answer is to approach them from emotional adulthood, taking full responsibility for your own emotions and for how you show up regardless of anything or anyone outside of you. If a rule or boundary needs to be set, you can do so from an emotionally clean place, and you can show up without a manual for other people so that you can feel better. And if you need to honor that rule, you can do so from a neutral place without any negative emotion involved. If you actually show up an emotional adult, this module was called How to Help Your Kids Quit Vaping Too, but it goes far beyond the scope of just your kids or quitting vaping. If you show up in your relationships with emotional adulthood, taking responsibility for every emotion you feel, the good and the bad, you also set clean rules and boundaries when you decide it's appropriate from a neutral place, and you honor them every single time with neutrality, and you drop your manual for how others need to show up for you to feel good. This is the winning formula for relationships, and it's going to put you in the most effective place to actually help create change for other people. This is ironic, I know. It's when you stop trying to make other people change, you put yourself in the best possible situation to help them change. This creates enormous influence for others. It creates intimacy and genuine connection. It allows you to feel good no matter what, and when you don't choose to feel good, it's a choice you make and you blame no one else for it. It discourages people pleasing or manipulation, and it dramatically improves your relationships on all fronts. This 3 combo is the winning combination, and it will help you tremendously with everything in your life, and it will position you to help your kids quit vaping too. When your kids are ready to receive this information, feel free to give them your login or anybody else you know in your life, and I'm happy to spread this course to anybody that you love that you also want to bring this material to. Thanks for being in this module. I'll talk to you later.